Are you letting them in on the process? What is the bigger vision? Like, what are you trying to do? And also what do they need? And slowing down on that part of the process has been really revelatory, I think, for us. We have a lot to learn, but I think that's one reason why we found it so useful to create spaces where we can engage and kind of work that muscle of, what does it look like to open and hold space for community members to see behind the scenes, but also share, how they're seeing things. What are they hearing on their block? You know what I mean? And you see so much of this kind of energy across the country right now. So many of our peers, the Canopy Atlantas, the city bureaus are really embracing that, and we're learning from them. But I think that what does it look like to slow down this work is really one of the biggest questions that I've been grappling with, and how we design things at Lede New Orleans.
Welcome to the Local News Matters podcast, where we explore pathways to stronger journalism, better businesses, and healthier communities. I'm Tim Regan-Porter, CEO of the Colorado Press Association. This episode, I talk with Jennifer Larino about her work as Executive Director of Lede New Orleans, a newsroom dedicated to empowering young BIPOC journalists to tell community stories. Lede New Orleans recently received a grant as part of Press Forward's first national awards, and I had the privilege of reading their application during the screening process. Their unique approach to community-centered journalism immediately stood out to me, and I wanted to learn more. Jennifer shares insights on how Lede New Orleans is building trusted spaces and centering community voices in local news, and why slowing down and listening deeply is critical for more inclusive storytelling. Jennifer has worked in New Orleans journalism for nearly 15 years, including leadership roles at the Times-Picayune and New Orleans City Business, and was a JSK Community Impact Fellow at Stanford University. I love this conversation, which ranged across a wide variety of topics and offered fresh perspectives that we might all benefit from. Certainly, on the heels of this month's national election, slowing down in order to do better work and maintain our own sanity and that of our teams is particularly timely advice. If you like this episode and what we're doing more generally, please follow in your favorite podcast app, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and tell your friends about us. This is a side project and a labor of love, and your support means a lot. You can find past episodes, full transcripts, and relevant links, and sign up for our newsletter at localnewsmatterspodcast.com, or for lazy typists like me at lnmpod.com. You can also follow us on most social media channels at lnmpod. And now I bring you Jennifer Larino. Welcome to the podcast, Jennifer. It's great to have you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Your newsroom, Lede New Orleans, was one of the winners of Press Forward grant, one of a couple hundred newsrooms that got $100,000. And I was actually on the screening review committee, read your application. And so I saved that one. Regardless of whether you were going to get a grant, I wanted to talk to you about what you were doing because I found it just so interesting and needed. So talk to me a little bit about the founding of Lede New Orleans, why you wanted to start it and what you're doing.
Well, thank you for that. It's nice to know that there are eyes out there looking at what we're doing, even if we aren't aware all the time. The story of Lede New Orleans really goes back to, me moving to New Orleans in 2010 as a young enterprising reporter and really discovering and building a career in the city. I have worked in New Orleans as a local reporter for, going on 15 years now, and really immersed myself in the community and that in covering this community. And in a deeper way, it's home. As a military kid who's moved all around, New Orleans really emerged as a place for me to take root. But, building a career in traditional news media here in local news and here in New Orleans, in such a unique city, the experience revealed to me a few different things. That, the main one being that, individual journalists work very hard to serve their communities and really have that at the center of their mission. But the models in which we work make it very difficult to incorporate community voice, to bring community into the decision making around news, and to really kind of democratize some of the skills that journalists sometimes take for granted. And most recently, I'd worked at the Times-Picayune, our local newsroom here in New Orleans and the region, really. Um, and over that time, what became more and more apparent as I was working was that we actually didn't have people in the newsroom who were from New Orleans. It was a very small contingent, and then Black New Orleanians, we're a majority Black city, were even more rare in our newsroom. And this was kind of across the board in media spaces, with the exception of TV news, maybe. So, kind of all of this thinking and thought work had been kind of going on in the back of my mind. And fast forward to 2019. The Times-Picayune was bought out by The Advocate. This was in the media world, this was like a big deal. It was one of those big newspaper buyout. A local newspaper at Baton Rouge, The Advocate, had bought out the Times-Picayune from a larger company, Advance Local. And in that process, all employees of the Times-Picayune, including myself, were laid off. And it was one of those moments of, okay, what now? And those moments are really scary and they're not fun. They're also critical, and especially in this environment that we've emerged into in media. For me, I love New Orleans. I didn't want to leave. And I'd built a life here and really wanted to invest in the community in ways that I wasn't really able to in kind of the traditional journalism model. And the first thing I did was started talking to my colleagues of color really about how they got into this work, and what we could do to address what I was seeing as like this exodus of really what were transplant reporters leaving to go on to other cities, but this gap of, you know, quality information for Black and Brown communities in New Orleans that is really fueled by the communities themselves. From those conversations, I was actually looking for someone within the community to partner with to start thinking about this idea. And this name kept emerging, Ijaz Mason. Ijaz Mason. Ijaz, you need to talk to Ijaz. Ijaz, who I wish were on this call with me, but he's out in California doing good work as part of the JSK Stanford Fellowship. Ijaz was in film at the time and also teaching film at the high school level. And he saw a lot of parallel things happen in terms of lack of diversity, a lot of outsiders coming into the city doing short documentaries about New Orleans and New Orleanians. And as a New Orleans native, he was thinking about how do we change that? We finally connected, and he jokes that he thought that I was trying to get him to do a video project or do free video for me or something. But we started meeting more regularly and thinking about what in the early days was a training program for emerging multimedia journalists, specifically Black and Brown young people, what it would look like to equip young people with skills, tools, and resources to inform their communities. And we launched our community reporting fellowship, which is what it is called now. It wasn't then. It was a little pilot in March of 2020 with impeccable timing, with 6 young people from New Orleans who were interested in learning more about how they could use film and multimedia journalism skills to serve their communities. When everything shut down for the pandemic, we could have stopped. That would have been easier, probably. But we had already been set up on Zoom for interviewing, and it just kind of panned out that we had all that in place. And we said, let's keep going. And since then, we've been growing that core programming and building a whole organization around that. It was rooted in this experience with local news and kind of the limitations of our current models, coupled with, where does journalism intersect with other information forms? That was really the basis of me and Ijaz's co-foundership. And I'm so glad that I started this organization with a non-journalist, because it's really led to some beautiful things.
Yeah, that is one fascinating aspect is that partnership. But and we'll delve more into that. Talk a little bit though about a little bit more about the need you were reacting to. I think in your application, you referred to New Orleans as a media swamp. And how is it not serving particularly people of color in New Orleans? Like what were you really responding to, and how did you hope that particularly getting young people out there doing some of this work would meet needs in a different way?
I love that term because we all know media desert. But if you come to New Orleans, it's a small city with actually like three plus TV stations. We have a radio station. We have newspapers. We have at one point we had the Advocate and the Times-Picayune, so two major newspapers. We have alt weeklies. We have all these sources of information. So you look at New Orleans and you say, how could possibly, how could there be information needs that aren't being met? What I will say from my time as a journalist, what I saw is we were often, because of our revenue models at that kind of the traditional legacy space, competing over the same stories. So you'd see the same exact headlines, maybe slightly different. Someone got a different source, but very similar websites across the board, for TV stations, for the Times-Picayune. And the narratives that, played most, of course, were crime, sports, the big things that generate that kind of minute-to-minute audienceship that model really demands, right? And then, among the alternative space, you have a lot of really tiny kind of custom outlets that, each kind of do their own thing, but again, are really kind of top down, right? They're not necessarily going out into community and be like, hey, what do y'all want to like read about? What do you want to do? Or what information needs do you have? There's kind of the small outlet that really is an advertising revenue driven model where they're really just trying to put together content so they can sell ads, and reach their audience and keep that going. And then you have kind of the alternate weekly model where the folks are, really trying to home in on like the artistic community and serve, up an alternate point of view that's really more white and progressive, quite frankly. And then you have really like our Black community of all ages, but really young Black folks, rarely driving decision making in the news business or really contributing to that, but much a part of the narrative. If we talk, 2 years ago, we had a whole narrative from the mayor and from our city hall level of how young people were creating all this crime over the summer, and that, there's just this terrible epidemic of youth crime. And I think that story would have been covered a lot differently, of course, if we had different kinds of people in newsrooms. So I think you have a lot of different options in New Orleans, but that the models are all very similar in that they're not bringing community voice into the process in multiple ways. And I think that's where we're testing something a little different. Not only are we trying to train young people specifically within the community to do and meet information needs, but we're also going out and we're talking to communities. We're gathering data about what do you need information on, like what is on your mind, what is missing, and how might we train people to meet that, within the span. To your question about why young people, I think that one, this is the voice that is most missing from most of these spaces, right? Anyone who has worked in journalism and been on the journalist side knows how difficult it is to crack into this industry, and how that is virtually impossible if you're going into college or even graduating college and you're just thinking, oh, I'm going to be a journalist. Like that, you're already, I don't know. There's a response, for you to get into a legacy news space. It's just the pathway is so crystallized and hardened. On the other side, I think there's this really big craving among community to like know what young people are doing and thinking and saying. And it's created this interesting audience, us working to equip young people to not only, tell their own stories, but tell stories of people in the community and elevate, here's what's happening. it's almost like for older generations, it's like a tuning, once they see who is making the pieces and who is behind it, it lends a different, it's the kind of the trusted messenger effect, of like, oh, hey, like here's somebody I say I want to listen to and hear more from. Now here's my chance. Why don't I do that? So yeah, it's been interesting, and certainly we don't have all the answers, but that is kind of the lane that we're testing. How do we meet those information needs with this group of young people on this segment of our population that doesn't really get to be in that space very much?
So let's talk a little bit about what your team is doing, the different programs. So you mentioned the Community Reporting Fellowship. You do community events and workshops, and I think you've piloted this year Fellowship 2.0, where you get some of the alumni back. So describe those programs and what kinds of journalism these young people are doing.
Happy to. So I've talked a little bit about our community reporting fellowship. So this is a paid 16 to 20 week training program specifically for BIPOC young people age 18 to 25. So this is really our core program. When I talk about what we started with in March of 2020, that this is it, right? This is this idea of like, can we pay young people in our communities to learn how to do this work and then go out and actually like make stories, fill that information need. Over the years, we've learned that yes, we can do that. We have about 45 alumni now of that program. We're entering, I think next year will be our 9th cohort. We do about 6 young people at a time. So it's very kind of focused work. But that is really like an intro program. You can come in and not really have any journalism experience before, and come in and learn the basics and learn the ropes. And what they do is they go through kind of training while doing. So, and we scaffold kind of mediums. So it starts usually with interviewing and learning that process and research, and working on writing and written work. So a lot of them will enter kind of journalistic style writing by doing some of these narrative pieces. So they'll explore kind of a larger topic through their own voice. And then we graduate into audio interviewing. And really what's kind of interesting about our program is we do short doc production. So kind of throughout that process, as they're interviewing, as they're doing audio interviewing and learning these different mediums, they graduate into production of a short doc, 5 to 10 minutes, around their theme that they're reporting on. And it kind of brings all those skills that they've been learning over that time together. And they come out with a short doc that they've worked on as teams, and then various written pieces that meet information needs. That brings me to I mentioned theme. We have a theme for each community reporting fellowship. And that theme is the reporting theme, and that's decided first by data that we cull from our community listening work. So we go out to festivals, local events, and we just talk to people. We have them fill out surveys about, what topics are they interested in? What do they need more information on? What do they want to see different stories about? So narrative and kind of how that's emerging in our city. And we pull all that together and we break out 3 different themes that people are elevating in our community as something that they need. From those 3, the young people who are in our community reporting fellowship actually vote on which they think is the best course to pursue. And then they take their entire fellowship to look into that issue. So, for example, our fall 2023 cohort looked into youth incarceration and abolition. So they wanted to introduce their elders specifically and family members to this idea of, hi, there is an abolition movement in our city and people thinking about alternatives to prison. What does that mean? What does that look like? And they even developed a vocabulary guide essentially for abolition terms to just kind of explore what that means, and to make it accessible for people in the community to discuss that. Things like that. or what emerged from the Community Reporting Fellowship. Really, all of our other programs are kind of built on top of that. Our community events take the work of the fellowship and really experiment with ways to deliver that to community members in different ways. So we know anyone who's worked in journalism knows how many times we talk to editors about length of articles and how people engage with written content and text, and the challenges of meeting an audience. I think a lot of the times those conversations framed around like, how can we get our audience to change, right? Or how can we get them to do what we want them to do? And we're really, with our community events program and workshops, we're trying to flip that model. So what does it look like if the audience has their ideal way of interacting with the content? And one thing that has really emerged to us is like live exhibits, in a sense, where we bring the reporting of our fellows to community, allow them to engage in on-the-spot conversations, art, and just kind of hold a space for dialogue around the topic, and then launch our content so that people can dig in more independently, is really something that people crave. And not just that, but creating safety in that kind of space is doubly important. So that's really that bucket of work. We're going to be relaunching our workshops to basically extend the work of the fellowship. So like I said, they focus for a short time on a theme. And what we want to experiment with is how can we bring community in to continue that work and that inquiry about a particular topic. So our current cohort is looking into public space and green space, and what does access look like for Black and Brown communities in New Orleans, and why is that important? What our goal is to have a series of workshops that are a community of practice model next year, where community members kind of take on the tools, and we are working on democratizing journalism skills to continue that inquiry and that research and that thought work around that issue for the next year. So kind of passing the baton outside of in furthering the work of the fellowship. So that's events, workshops, and then of course you mentioned Fellowship 2.0. We have this alumni group of amazing storytellers who are all still quite young and looking for opportunities. And this pilot program, the Fellowship 2.0 program, was really about experimenting with what happens if we fund specific projects. So one-off editor fellow partnerships, they work on projects that are their own pitch, that are specific to New Orleans and meet information needs here in that way. So really just kind of creating additional ecosystem room for the young people that retrain to continue telling stories and doing that work. So really, it's all about like different ways that how do we get out this question of, we have a very full ecosystem, but there's this very big gap, for Black and Brown communities specifically of, information is not responsive and relevant. We've been able to get at that with the Community Reporting Fellowship, but we're trying, different ways to deliver and meet that need. And that's what's great about being Lede New Orleans. We could be that nimble.
Talk to me a little bit about who the content reaches, so your audience. So, aside from the community events, you've got a great YouTube channel. I would encourage people to look at some of the videos. That's great work from some young people. Instagram and that sort of thing. But are you partnering with other media to get the content out there? What's your approach there?
It's a great question, and I think it's going to change within the next 2 years. So one challenge that we faced almost immediately was we were very interested in partnering with legacy media, and I had a network and Ijaz had his own network, and we were trying to leverage that, but it was really difficult. You wind up waging this campaign of changing minds about, who an expert source is, who should be, what does the process for journalism look like? We really just wanted space to experiment. So at first, we tried kind of the media partnership model and thought, okay, well, what happens if we just kind of see what can happen? We'll publish our own stuff, right? So that's really what we've been working on for the past 4 years. Can we just make things, and show that it's possible. And we've really relied on Medium and some of these, platforms, YouTube, social media to get that work out there and to build an audience of our own, really. And our events really a kind of content stream. So we really worked on kind of building our own audience. And in that process, we started to get recognition and started to see the traditional and legacy spaces looking our direction and kind of saying, how are you doing that? Like, what are you doing? So moving forward, what we're really interested in is partnering with organizations that are trying to reach the same audience as us, or trying to meet that ecosystem gap. And you've seen some headway in that space here in New Orleans. Verite is a nonprofit news outlet that just opened in the city about 2 years ago, with a focus on minority communities and serving those communities. We're seeing more recognition of the importance of getting different kind of voices into legacy spaces. So I think it was important for us to kind of lay that experimental groundwork and just get content out there and meet people where we knew we could. And now we're curious about, like, what does a partnership, or what does a placement type of relationship with our ecosystem look like? Who are the people that are aligned in this work? But I think this is a big struggle of journalism. And in the moment that we're at, we talk about partnership a lot. We talk about, what makes sense. And I think we get in over our heads a lot, because we're trying to pile on too much on, one relationship. So cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to get some headway and make some gains there. But up to this point, it's been mostly we make things, and then an outlet will pick it up. We've worked with YR Media, which is a national organization and media outlet that focuses on youth-produced media out of California. They've been awesome in really working with our fellows to get their voices amplified to a national audience. And then we've also worked with Verite, who have seen our stuff, said, "Oh, we'd love to have this voice, here," and communicating back and forth that way. So it's been more one-off, kind of what strikes, those outlets. But I'm hoping to kind of have that be part of our model, and what we experiment with in the future is just, how could this work? You see it happening in Chicago, New York, other cities. How could it work in New Orleans?
That space to experiment is so crucial. We know in this industry we have a hard time getting young people, to pay attention to the news that we produce. And it's not just about hiring more young people, right? It's about talking to them in different ways, in different formats, and different platforms. And I'm curious, you're coming there from what was an advanced local newsroom, and like most of our industry, reach is really paramount, and feeding the beast. And this is very much not that, right? It's not sacrificing all on the altar of reach. It's not feeding a beast. It's having a whole different level of engagement and conversation and the types of stories you're telling. How was that for you to make that adjustment? And what have you learned maybe that legacy media, traditional media, can start to think about that in a different way?
That is a great question. I think I've learned that slowing down is really hard, and you feel like you're doing everything wrong, honestly, when you emerge from the environment you just described. As a journalist in that environment and as an editor, I had no idea just how fast we were moving, and there are people that continue to carry on that torch, And when you move that fast through stories, through the editing process, the thought process, you miss a lot. I think that's what a lot of journalists feel. Over a number of years, you tend to miss. So, I think at the beginning of this journey, I thought it would be easy to slow down. But what I'm realizing is that it's actually like really, really difficult, and it's a constant check on processes, a lot of the things that you take for granted. I'll think of a good example. So we are on a production timeline for two short docs that our fellowship produced this summer, and we need them done by Saturday. And part of our process is we bring community in, the community members who were part of it, and the storytellers in there who are featured in the docs, and we have them view it. And always we're just like, we want them to view it at this time. Like, how do we bring people in? Like, and we don't want them to see the super rough cut, but it's always a race on time, right? Because we're, working on deadline. But it's those little adjustments that have helped us build the kind of trust and just model a different way that I think means a lot for community members who, kind of see the faster paced journalism model not serving them as much. So we have the liberty to do that. Like we, have the flexibility in the way our revenue model is. We have that space to experiment, as we mentioned earlier. But I think that there's a lot of room to do that in traditional spaces. And now, as a journalist, I was even trying to cultivate some of that for myself. I would tell my editors if I just wanted to take a day to call and just fact check the story myself. I want to go back to my source. And I loved that part of the work, going back and saying hey, I just want to make sure I got everything right. Community members loved that, and that's something I've carried with us to here. It is part of our editorial process at Lede New Orleans. Everything gets fact checked, everything, goes through a callback, and we bring people into that process. I think that's been the biggest learning is the slowdown doesn't necessarily have to be on the production, how we bring everything together. It really actually is on the front end of when you're actually out in community, interviewing people, talking to folks. Are you letting them in on the process? What is the bigger vision? What are you trying to do? And also what do they need? And slowing down on that part of the process has been really revelatory, I think, for us. We have a lot to learn, but I think that's one reason why we've found it so useful to create spaces where we can engage and kind of work that muscle of, what does it look like to open and hold space for community members to see what we're doing, see behind the scenes, but also share, how they're seeing things. What are they hearing on their block? You know what I mean? And you see so much of this kind of energy across the country right now. So many of our peers, the Canopy Atlantas, the city bureaus are really embracing that, and we're learning from them. But I think that what does it look like to slow down this work is really one of the biggest questions that I've been grappling with, and how we design things at Lede New Orleans.
And I know that slowing down can feel like a luxury and privilege that a lot in our industry don't have. Heading into a second Trump administration, I think we're going to see we can't have a repeat of the daily outrage and the cycle we had through 2016, and I think we're going to see demand from our audiences to give more context, step back, don't just feed a beast. And so it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, but I think we're definitely going to see a demand for that. How do you make that work financially, right? That's one of the reasons these beasts grow so big, is they're what get fed, and we don't know how to stop feeding them, because that's what our advertising and membership, sponsorship, donations, everything depends on. So how are you making it work?
I think it starts with framing. We can be very siloed in journalism, and only tell the journalism story of, journalists doing journalism, and it's important for democracy. And that kind of limits our funding and kind of, puts us in that same messaging. With Lede New Orleans, we're an interesting hybrid where we sit at the intersection of a lot of issues that really matter for community. So in New Orleans, youth development is a really big, not issue, but a topic that a lot of people are thinking and talking about. Informed communities is something that goes beyond journalism, but that journalism is a critical piece of. And then we also have art. We have culture. We have vibrancy in New Orleans that Lede New Orleans is tapping into to inform communities. And I think that really breaking, from a high level perspective, we'll get in the nitty gritty, but from the high level perspective, breaking out of we are just a news organization who does X, Y, and Z. And democracy is, this is essential to democracy, has helped us really cultivate supporters. So we are a 501c3, and we are a nonprofit, but to cultivate support outside of the journalism space. So Press Forward was really our first big journalism nod, right? Up to this point, we've really been just trying to tell the story of young people meeting information needs as like an essential community need, right? A civic need. And I think that's opened different doors for us financially. Do we have it all figured out? No, we are a nonprofit, and the same as for profit. It's just, we are hustling for money, and we're trying to figure out how to make these things work. But I think that openness of we're not only going to go after, these specific funders or this specific thing. Diversity is king, right? Like that helps you navigate revenue and make these things work. We'll caveat that with saying it's important to create what you're going to make, right? And not go after funding so that you can make something that the funding wants, right? Which can be challenging, right? Sometimes when you get into like journalism art, and you want to like go after funding, and you're like, oh, we could do this, but what does the community actually want? So I think that that's been important for us on the funding side and fundraising side. I'll say like I'm a journalist. And now I'm our fundraiser, and this has been a totally new experience for me, but so much of it comes to that framing and that storytelling, which is what we learn as journalists, right? It's very hard to tell our own stories, right? Or to vocalize the needs and kind of insert yourself when you have that journalistic training. But that's kind of the flip, the switch that's flipped for me. The other thing I was going to say about fundraising is really going back to that slow conversation. What does slow growth look like for us? I've read a lot about how women-led organizations tend to think in this way. But I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. You see a trend where right now, especially in the nonprofit news space, there's a lot of money coming in all at once, and it's awesome. I think where we're at, though, for the past 4 years has been just thinking about what does it look like to not only do this work and slow it down, but what does it look like to grow intentionally and to really like embrace strategy at a young age? And again, that takes slowing down. And it's not really something that you see a lot of 4-year-old organizations doing, but it's something that we're trying to do. There are things that we are not going to do. And we can't fall into that trap of trying to do everything, or trying to pursue every kind of funding, just kind of really understanding capacity. Journalism is one of those spaces where the overexertion, overgiving is kind of just the norm, right? But the reset of that thinking of like, what is needed, and what do we need to ask for, and what makes sense? It's hard. They're harder questions to answer than you might think, and they take time. So I'm very grateful to have a board of directors who understands that and asks those kind of questions and really is focused on the strategy portion of this, and a staff of all former program participants, I'll add, which we're very proud of, that is coming along on this journey and embracing that. Because we are one piece of the pie within a larger ecosystem, right? We're not trying to eat the whole pie. So what does that look like, And from an operations fundraising standpoint, that is challenging, but important to take the time to work through those questions. So From nuts and bolts perspective, a lot of our fundraising up to this point has come from youth development space. So this recognition among funders, specifically in New Orleans and national funders who are working in New Orleans, that we need to invest in young people who are disconnected from work and school. That is our group who we work with at the 18 to 25 range, right? And then also various different mediums that serve as information conduits for community, whether that be documentary spaces, whether that be audio, and just kind of opening up what we consider ourselves as and how we tell our story and explain the importance of what we're doing.
What can you tell me about impact, both in the community as well as your alumni? What have they gone on to do?
So I will start this conversation by saying that's been one of our biggest learnings in terms of how do we think about our impact and how are we measuring it and what is that story that we're telling, right? So from the very beginning, Lede New Orleans has always had a big focus on telling the stories of our fellows, so the individuals who come through our programs, which you were asking about, and really kind of figuring out like why are they coming into the program, what do they want to do, and then following them once they get out. One thing that I'm super, super proud of is about half of our fellows are from New Orleans, and either Black or brown folks from New Orleans, which is, some people might say, only half, really? But I think that's a really big thing for us because a lot of the naysayers in our community would say our schools don't prepare young people for this kind of work. What is the interest if people have never seen people like them doing journalism work in the city? And that we've been able to challenge that in just the different ways we're communicating about the program and what we do here, right? There's a lot of young people that are interested in civic leadership and media, but maybe don't see the two connecting, and journalism is kind of the thread there, right? So just kind of different ways of that we're recruiting and messaging around this. Of those 45 young people we've trained, all have completed the program, which is that's pretty big, right? Like to spend multiple months, with an organization, we do pay. So I think that has been essential, right? To giving the financial support to pursue your ambition. It's critical. So that is big. Beyond that, though, what we're starting to realize, well, let me actually go back to individuals. So our individuals who have gone through the program, again, these are folks 18 to 25, they have gone on to do so many different incredible things, which I think is a big learning for us. Not all of them are like, I want to go into a newsroom. Some have. We've had folks go on to ESPN, and work for ESPN. We've had folks that have gone on to work at the 19th and do social media and things like that. But really, what we've been really interested in is how our fellows are using these skills and going all different directions with it. So we have people that have entered education. We have people that have entered the organizing space and are doing, their own storytelling around organizing and kind of building their own platforms. One fellow, Alec, I'm thinking up in particular, works with our small but very vibrant Asian American Pacific Islander community here in New Orleans and is building a storytelling platform around, just capturing and documenting those stories, which is crucial, right? So not a journalist per se, but very much doing this kind of work. We've had people, of course, go on into marketing and do various different things with the skills that they have. Film production is another big avenue. But I want to say all that and say that we're now learning, though, that our impact is really beyond those little individual stories. That is an awesome, secondary, maybe even tertiary part of what we do. But we're starting to understand that our impact is really in one, what we're making and how that's different from what exists. So media content. And then two, this trusted space aspect, especially as we enter, another 4 years where there's going to be not a lot of trust and a lot of need for Black and brown communities to come together to discuss issues. Being able to establish spaces of trust has been something that we have noticed as our impact, but we haven't been measuring, which is such the rub, right? We haven't been actually asking people. So what is, do you trust this space, and literally having surveys and whatnot that measure that. So that's a direction that we're actually headed right now. We are investing in our content because we realize that that is where our impact lies. People in our community craves this, and from the little surveying that we've done, we have about, I would say about 30% of our survey respondents say that we are meeting a need that is not currently existing. That's just not currently existing, right? For the folks that the majority of our audience, they're saying, maybe we see this, but this is where I'm going to get information that is from young people and from the community. So I think that there's still a lot of learnings that we have to really document, which is such an interesting part of being in the nonprofit space, is that you're kind of forced to document the impact, right? And report back to funders and whatnot. Whereas when I was a journalist, we never really did that. We didn't really follow up, right? So I'm excited about it. I like it. Not everybody loves that part of the work. But really, like, that's part of our innovation is like, how are we thinking about impact and how are we measuring it, especially in these live spaces? Like, that's something that we're really excited about headed into next year is, what are people getting, when they walk in here, and how do we document that in a way that we can continue to tell our story on and really guide our decision making? Because at the end of the day, that's that funnel that we want to keep, or that cycle that we want to keep going into. What are you getting from the space community member, and how do we deliver more of that?
Yeah. Talk a little bit about partnering with someone outside of journalism with a totally different storytelling background, and what was that process like, and how did it shape your thinking? How did you shape each other's thinking, maybe?
Ejaz, if you're listening, I'm so grateful for you, always. I think that, like I said earlier, it was critical for us getting to where we are now, which we still have so much more to do and want to grow. But I think that having somebody and working with people who are outside the journalism space really helps you open up possibility. This is possibility in terms of like how information can be presented. So I was a print journalist, my medium is always going to be written form, right? That's where I'm comfortable with. Like, that's what I was wanting to teach in our programs and really work through. And then EJOS, of course, having the visual element, had a totally different take on like what people connect with, what would help people access the kind of information that they're looking for. And so from like a medium standpoint, right off the bat, we brought very different perspectives and skill sets that I think really help shape, especially our training program and what we emphasize. I think we're really unique in that we're trying to figure out different mediums that really reach our audience. Because the reality is, across the South, but in New Orleans, we're battling varying rates of literacy. We're working with time crunches, people that gotta work like a lot, and don't have time to consume news in the ways that we serve it up a lot of the time. And then also utility, like how do people like use something, So right off the bat, we were already kind of coming from these different perspectives and thinking about what do we train people in? Like what's important. But I think at the core of each of our skill set was kind of like a responsiveness and adaptability that has really helped in shaping our programming. And we're iterative, and we've been able to adapt and shape and kind of push and challenge. And that has been really, really valuable. What I will say also is our personal backgrounds were very critical to, the DNA of this organization. I'm not from New Orleans. I love New Orleans. It's my home. But I am much like most of the journalists that are in New Orleans. I've come from elsewhere and learned the city, but have my own blind spots, and my own things that I think are true but need to be tested. And Ejaz is a New Orleans native. A Black New Orleanian who grew up here and has seen a lot and, knows the narratives in the city. And I think from the narrative perspective, it's really interesting. Very early on, we had a lot of interesting conversations about what the narrative that are flying around about New Orleans are, and how we're going to, how, like, do you unpack that? So very early on, our fellowship was not just a space to learn skills. It was also like this almost philosophical space where we were thinking about things beyond, how do you put this story together? And I think that's something that has been a thread throughout, and that our fellows really, they don't get anything like that normally, right? So much of our journey in education is about what skills you can get to equip you to move on to some sort of career. And time again, we survey our fellows, before, during, and after their fellowship. They will say, the conversations we had in this space are unlike any that I've ever had. And I remember being a young journalist and being in newsrooms where I would encounter those conversations and think like, wow, like, this is so cool that I get to be a part of this, and thinking about some of these bigger issues. So being able to bring that to a broader part of the community through the fellowship has been really cool. But it's kind of baked into our DNA and how Ijaz and I interacted. We were always pushing and challenging each other and having some of these, and we continue to, big debates about what is the story of New Orleans that's being told right now, and how is it different from what we're experiencing. So those are some of the things. There's a whole laundry list of things that I think really, really benefited us, and helped us get that start. But those differing perspectives and skill sets were crucial, and that's a lesson that you can scale. For all newsrooms, who do you have in the room? Is always important.
We did back when I was at the Center for Collaborative Journalism, we did a 6-week, no, it wasn't even that long, 2 weeks, high school journalism media camp. And, we're largely, had a decent sized print newsroom attached and a public radio station. And, we were some of the journalists had to learn video production, DSLR, InDesign, Photoshop, not InDesign, Final Cut. And the quality of the work that these kids were doing with a couple weeks to train, and you teach them how to write, also you teach them how to do good audio, teach them good storytelling, and you just put them out there, and they were really into it, and they produced some great work. So I hear newsrooms all the time, wanting more young people, but you've got to change your rhythms, and you've got to let them do this kind of work. But also the training is crucial, and that's something a lot of people aren't comfortable with. How have you approached training? Who is doing the training, and how hard was that to actually get ramped up, and what have you learned?
We have the benefit, I'll say, of being a training space that makes media rather than a media space that is trying to make training or trying to do training. Back to our old conversation, our former conversation about the pace. Yes, when you equip people with the resources to do what they aspire to do, incredible things happen. That said, it can be slow and demand different skills for nurturing emerging creators into that role. So I don't want to discount that part of it. When as you were saying, when we hear newsrooms saying we want younger talent, we want more multimedia, more different kinds of thinkers in our space, it also requires a different leadership, a different management style than I think a lot of traditional spaces are used to, quite honestly, because we are set up where, we're training, that we know and have accepted that that's part of our space. I think it makes it easier for us, one, to establish the culture that we need to be able to, of course, meet people where they're at, but also like have the listening in place, the coaching in place to move them through the work, which, as a camp model, will indicate with some of these other training models that have historically worked and done really well. Like, a lot of it is about having that culture, right? Where we're here to learn and figure things out, but we also want to make stuff. So that is not always the case in in newsrooms, and why is that, I guess? Where is the learning culture, right? cultivating a culture where people can learn and push and question even the process of doing something is important. When you do that, you wind up attracting professionals. So that's part of our model. We attract freelancers mostly, but people who are working journalists to serve as instructors and editors as our program. So as young people are moving through the program, they're also connecting with people that are actually working in the space, which was very important to me to have, people that are currently working. When you're kind of pushing the culture aspect of we're learning and we're kind of rethinking journalism, you attract different kinds of people, that are also thinking about this within the context of their careers or maybe even their newsrooms. So that's something really interesting that's emerged from this project and this work that I don't think I anticipated, just like how many journalists want to engage in this thought work of reimagining what journalism could be like, slowing down different aspects, and challenging some of the culture aspects of the industry, but just don't have a space to do it. So that's helped us to bring people who are experienced into the space. I think a challenge with that is we are competing with time. It's a struggle to pay a rate that competes, with the work that freelancers are doing. If they need to go shoot something, they're a photographer and they need to go shoot something for the New York Times, they're gonna go do that job. And, our training session on Saturday, we're gonna have to figure something else, out. So I think that it's something that is a big priority for us in terms of keeping our media professionals engaged in this work, because they actually there's impact on their end of like having space to think about a different way of doing things. But we also have, we face that challenge of the larger industry and the pace at which things move and people just trying to hustle. So I think that those are two elements of the way we do things that I think help set us up for ushering young people without a lot of journalism experience, kind of connecting the dots from that to you've now published articles, you've been part of a documentary. The third thing I think is just like really breaking down the editorial process and like where do you need your expertise most at? Something that we've found, of course, is that editing and kind of having that experience on how to manage projects and know how much time things take, for example, is crucial for us in an area that we need to invest in. And if you could have that, you can kind of, the other pieces fall into place. But it's so much about leadership and like, who do you have in your corner who's contributing that knowledge and that framework, but also within this culture of we're here to learn, we're here to challenge things. Nothing's a given. It's a unique environment. And I love it.
You mentioned JSK in relation to EJAZ, but you did a fellowship. Where did that fall in the timeline, and what did you take out of that? And I saw your Medium post from that time too, and I can very much see how that factors into what you're doing now.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to think of years here. In the past few years have been such a blur. Okay. EJAZ is a JSK 23-24 fellow, right? Yeah. So I was the year prior to that. So we were actually the community impact fellows in that cohort. So the model that JSK adopted for the post-COVID era was remote. And that we would be continuing to work in our communities, but engage remotely in the training and support that the fellowship offered. Then we went out to Stanford and were able to come together as a cohort and really think through some of the bigger picture issues and think about where we were. That fellowship was critical, came at a critical time for me in my leadership journey with Lede New Orleans and where we were headed. So we were about 3 years old when I first started. So we were not a pilot anymore. We were emerging from infancy as an organization and entering toddlerhood. And as a mother of a toddler, that is an interesting time. It's a lot of exploration and uncertainty. And that having a place weekly to go to, think about bigger picture issues, to work on leadership, but also to have mentorship around fundraising, particularly when I'm a journalist. Like I don't do the money part, right? Like and learning that how to manage a board, kind of all these new skill sets that were just cascading upon me. Having spaces like that is so critical if you're going to continue doing this work and not just cry and quit, quite honestly. Because there were a lot of times when I wanted to cry. I don't think I ever really got close to quitting, but it's a lot. You start with a spark of an idea and then it actually turns into something. And now you're faced with this question of, do we grow it, or what do we want this to be? Now so many other lives are involved. So yeah, it was a critical space. And I thought it was a critical time to most of that cohort. We're in a similar kind of sector, I guess, of news right now where, they were kind of pushing the envelope in terms of what it means to serve community, specifically Black and Brown and BIPOC communities. So it was really cool to be able to build those connections, to have that space to think about some of the skills that I really needed to skill up on. And it really began that journey with JSK in order to build a sustainable, healthy organization. That's a little different from JSK's kind of you go out to Stanford model, but it worked really well for what I needed. I needed to be able to invest in Lede New Orleans and grow. It's a little different from being a journalist in a larger newsroom where you're looking, to get outside of the space to think. I really needed to be in my space to see how some of these ideas applied. And I'm so grateful that I caught that opportunity, to be able to do that. It catalyzed Lede New Orleans. I mean, after that, as a result of coaching from that, we got one of our largest grants to fund the Community Reporting Fellowship and really grow it. So eternally grateful to Don and Alberto over there for their guidance and the work that they do.
I've been amazed at how well that remote program worked because it's not the same as the on-campus experience, but the number of community impact fellows I've gotten to know and seen around, and they feel just as connected, it seems, as the on-campus cohort was. And that's been great to see. I'll have to talk to Dawn at some point about designing that because I think that's rare.
For that cohort, so many of us were like entrepreneurs in news, either starting an organization or co-founding or, just leading, and I think that was what made the remote dynamic work, is that we were all in kind of this high need positioning of being entrepreneurial and running organizations. So I think that's kind of after having reflected on that experience, those connections, that's the connection I made in terms of like what made that cohort like so effective.
All right. So now for the rapid fire segment, and my questions will be quick, but your answers don't have to be. So the first question, compared to a year ago, are you more or less optimistic about the future of local news?
I am more optimistic. I am an optimist at heart, but I think all the projects that are happening, especially at the local level, and really starting to see investment and interest from funders across the country, it's just really promising and really awesome to see. And it's great to be a part of that.
Yeah. Does AI fill you with more hope or dread when it comes to journalism?
There's a mix. I think I'm leaning more toward hope. There's a lot we need to think about, especially in the realm of journalism and how it impacts us. But from our context in Lede New Orleans, we're really interested about training and how AI can really help equip and enable community members to meet information needs, of course, with the parameters of good journalism.
What's the best piece of advice you've been given, or do you have a favorite piece of advice you like to give?
What comes to mind is if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. So as we were talking about slowing down and really trying to manage and think about how you grow, I think that's something that's bubbled up recently. If it's not a hell yes, it's a no.
I like that. Is there a piece of common advice or conventional wisdom that drives you crazy in its wrongness or oversimplification?
I think the idea that communities don't really care about news or where they get it from is something I hear kind of, still popping up, even though we have this trend of more kind of community focused news and information initiatives. People do care, and people may not realize all the forces that play that are influencing how they get information. But when you sit them down to talk about it, you start to realize that they do care.
Yeah, and I want to dig in here for a minute because I thought about this too when I was asking about the hope for local news as we're talking, the end of election week. And a lot of us, I think, are doing some introspection about our industry and our relation with our communities. And I think misinformation maybe didn't play as big of a role. I think it played a role. But I think different information or lack of information definitely did. And this is not because the candidate I may have wanted to win did or didn't, but it's clear and just hearing from people and some of the coverage and that people have very different media diets, not just because of, Fox News and CNN watchers, but also people at different economic strata and different life circumstances have different time, amounts of time available, different levels of trust. They just can, people have different information diets. And so I've been wondering, what does this mean for local news and what do we need to do different or better? And a lot of local news, we've kind of abandoned the national picture, and some of that makes sense. We don't need to get into a lot of that. And if we don't bring a particular expertise, but being able to explain what does, a proposed tariff mean for this community and the businesses in this community? What does this mean for whatever the policy is or discussion? That's something we should be doing, I think, at the local level. We need to insert ourselves back into that. But also, we just need to be convening people and having them talk as neighbors. It's not always about hard news. It's also about, the arts and culture. And if you get to know your neighbors, maybe we can have conversations that clarify. So, yeah, what would you say to all of that?
Yeah. I mean, what a poignant moment that we're at, right? I think that's something that's really resonated with me coming out of this election was how much shared values can be interpreted differently. So I was just listening to a story on NPR about polling questions and the question of this election, this statement, I guess you would say, of this election is about protecting democracy. For folks who were on the Harris camp, this is about, maintaining democracy, making sure the process is fair. That candidate represented that to them. But you could also have, a Trump supporter who agrees with that statement and would answer yes to a pollster who believes that the election was stolen, right? And that, voting Trump in was a reinstatement of democracy, right? And fair is fair. So I think that, within the context of all of that, I think that local news and kind of community level news, we can't forget to help people connect the dots. Or we can't assume that people are connecting the dots of what's happening here in our neighborhoods to that bigger picture. And we call this the nut graph or the why it matters graph in our written journalism and our print journalism. But I think that, as we focus on providing more useful information, as we focus on, trying to really just meet immediate needs, whether that's creating a space where people can talk about the larger context or, including, an explainer kind of segment of whatever it is, whatever information you're trying to provide that connects it to that bigger piece and picture. I do think, like you were saying, that local news is uniquely positioned to meet that need, and to describe that, or at least foster that conversation about how this is impacted. A major theme of this election was just cost of goods and inflation and people seeing that in their lives, right? And that's a very local news topic, right? We can get out there and talk to people about how this is impacting them. But what is that constant work of connecting that to the larger picture of like, what does inflation actually mean? Like, who has control over that? Like, what does that mean? Like, I still don't even know. And I'm a business reporter, I need to re-examine that. But those are the things that really help us dig a little bit deeper and add complexity to the narrative, which I think that's something that local news is so uniquely positioned to do, because we know our community so well. How do we add that complexity and maintain that trust that we've worked to build?
Yeah,
Mhm.
and there, even just that one question on democracy is such a rich area for nuance, because not only do you have a sort of simplistic red and blue view on what that question means. If you dig even, what does democracy mean to people? And for, I had this conversation with Jay Rosen where he talked about, the people who want to blow it up and then the defenders of democracy. It's like, but there's also this sort of other category. You can not want to blow it up and also criticize it, right? And there are some people who felt like democracy wasn't working for them. They've never been included. And so as local journalists, we can have facilitate those conversations, dig into that, and provide context. Even with inflation, we should be talking about the impact on people's everyday lives. We should also be having maybe a solutions journalism lens and how does it work? What are the approaches? But also placing in an international picture. It's been a problem worldwide, and we've actually done better than most countries. And you might have heard something I think just came out yesterday, maybe, where someone published a study looking at all of the elections basically going back to like 1905. And this is the first one in all that time where every single governing party around the world lost seats, right? And so it's hard for local people to give that context, but if we're doing a good job as an ecosystem, can we tap into that and bring that into our stories so that we're giving people more holistic frameworks and facilitating those deeper and richer conversations?
Yeah, and I also think the work of just documenting people's voices, right? So often I think that sometimes as journalists, we just feel like we've got to explain it all and tie it together, and like, but if you're just out there documenting what people are saying, and digging in and trying to kind of lead, or facilitate these more complex discussions, you're gonna get at some of that complexity that would just don't emerge at the national media level, at the pollster level, you know what I mean? And it's quite helpful beyond the context of journalism, but it's hard and slow work, as we were talking about, earlier with slow journalism that is slow and it doesn't always fit in the context of the story. It's something that we've found. Like we can document a lot of voices, but like, what's the end product? What do we do with it? Is it just information for us, or is there something that we can deliver that would be helpful for community? That's something that is curious to me.
I think that has to go beyond, at least in terms of this broader picture we're talking about, beyond just Vox Pop or the more gendered term man on the street. Some of the most interesting work I've heard, it comes out of the political arena, not the media, or certainly not journalism, but the Bulwark, Sarah Longwell, who was a never Trumper, but she started, I think back in 2017, started these focus groups. And listening to her talk about that in these very rich conversations, right? So it's not getting a quote for your story. It's really trying to understand, how do people see things? Why do they see them that way? And digging into that. Yeah. And I think that's an anecdote to the knee-jerk reaction that a lot of Harris supporters, but a lot of that breaks down on education lines, right? And journalists come out of that economic and educational status. And there's a tendency among, I wouldn't say journalists, but college educated folks to dismiss people as being ignorant, or, you can throw all kinds of other epitaphs, but that not really understanding where they're coming from. And, and there certainly are bad actors of all political persuasions. And some of them certainly came to the fore in the MAGA movement. And I think we need to talk about that. But there's a lot more nuance that we need to have. And I think what you're saying about bringing people's voices to the fore, and not just stick a mic in their face, right? And let them give whatever's on top of the head, but rich, deep conversations and understanding where people are coming from and why they think the way they do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't always fit in the confines of a story. I think that's the most limiting thing for journalists, is, yeah, sometimes it's work that's almost outside, but informs. It's almost like that background research.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is one of the things I love about what you're doing in terms of the mini docs. So you know, there aren't enough documentary filmmakers in the world probably to get at all of this, but with a little bit more time and a little slow journalism, you can start to peel away, at the onion or whatever the
Yeah.
metaphor should
Yeah.
be.
Who are the people that don't show up? There's so many different, yeah, it takes even on a very local issue, we would just did a short doc on a youth farm that is leasing land in our city park. And city park wanted to change a few things. And their lease was on the chopping block as they wanted to build a new road. And community came together and said, no, like we value this farm. But within that story, there was the larger story of like this battle between, or disagreement between City Park and Grodat, the organization. But there's so many stories of the people in the organization, the young people they work with, and their connection to land, people that had never heard of Grodat, so it's like we know this as journalists, but I think again in the hustle to deliver, and feed the beast, as you had said earlier, it can be very tempting to just kind of, we need to get this quote, this quote, this quote, this quote, pull it all together. All right, on to the next.
Failure is an important part of life, and it's actually an important part of journalism. Certainly, as an organization, we don't like to fail in our journalism. Sometimes we do, but it's what gets us to a new place sometimes and provides some of the most rich learning experiences. We don't like to talk about it. So, do you have a favorite failure of yours?
Mm, I mean, I feel like it's all the time. As a startup, a nonprofit startup, like that is something that you have to embrace. I think like something that immediately comes to mind is I had mentioned earlier that, I'm a journalist who has evolved and grown into this executive directorship and learning how to fundraise and put together budgets and really run an organization. A failure that I had last year was we were rushing to pull together an operating budget. I had run all these numbers. I thought we were solid. And I get to the end of the year, our board had already approved this budget. And I realize, and I'm going through the numbers again, and I'm realizing we didn't put in payroll taxes, which is gigantic now that we have a staff. Like, that's a major thing. Record scratch. Had to, eat my words, go back to our board and just say, like, look, here's where we're at. Thought it was gonna be a much bigger thing. And they're mainly like, we're glad that you do the work that you do to catch this and make sure that we're on top of our stuff. And it all was resolved. But I think the higher level learning from that failure is what happens when you rush. When you rush things through, you don't do what you need to do, or you miss things. So that has been the theme of my year this year is slow down the process, whether that's doing journalism, whether we're doing budgets, whether we're doing this. I always feel like especially in our industry, we operate with a scarcity mindset, and it bites us, and only after I left the Times-Picayune did I realize how deep it is, deeply embedded in my DNA, a sense of how I operate. So a lot of this year, kind of starting with that big failure at the beginning of the year was just kind of unwinding and unpacking that. It's still on the journey, but yeah, that immediately came to mind when you said that.
It can be tough in this industry as a journalist, as an editor. Running a nonprofit is its own challenge. Being a citizen is a challenge sometimes. What do you do to maintain your sanity and mental health?
Travel, getting out of your bubble as local, as much as I love New Orleans and, want to spend all my time here. I think breaking out of your norm is just so essential for reigniting that creativity, seeing how other people do it. I just went to Mexico City for the first time in a long time this past summer. And yeah, just being able to connect with journalists there was really cool. And seeing the things that they're thinking about and other nonprofit leaders there as well. So yeah, I think that's a big thing. And then of course, family time, reconnecting with the very intimate and most important things in my life. I have a 16-month old baby, so he keeps me busy. And then of course my life partner and husband, Glenn, he grounds me. So yeah, those are the big things.
And what about as a leader? How do you help your team maintain their sanity?
The biggest thing for me this year has been investing in my leadership capabilities. I think coming out of legacy newsrooms left me with a very narrow view of what it means to be a leader, a very white male view of what it means to be a leader, authoritarian. And really, these past couple of years, kind of starting with the JSK Stanford Fellowship and coming into this year and a few other learning opportunities, really just kind of understanding what leadership means to me. And then like learning how to ask questions in a way that guide my team. This was a major and recent learning because I was like, oh, I'm a journalist. Like I've got this. I know how to ask questions. I know when you are questioning as a leader and as a manager, it is a totally different ballgame. And I never really seen the distinction of, when you're a journalist, you're trying to drive questioning that reaches a result, right? You need this piece of information for your story. And I had not had a lot of a lot of practice with more open questioning of like, I don't know what the result is, staff member. I'm trying to help you get there and help you work through the pieces in your mind. And really that practice and kind of leaning into that's a very recent development for me. And one that I learned my journalism skills actually didn't quite prepare me as much for. So it's been a really interesting journey, but that has been probably the biggest change maker more recently for my team is how I'm investing in how I ask questions and how, I'm equipping team members to solve their own problems rather than rushing in with ideas. That's also the founder syndrome. We're always ready with ideas, right? But yeah, that has been a really big thing for our team, and we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, a lot of times for that question, I'll get some basic, make sure people take vacation, that sort of thing. But I think reflecting on yourself as a leader is really crucial. And an episode I've recorded, but I think it'll come out after this, with with the team from RJI and their researcher who did the burnout survey. And, what people needed was, they need to make sure they take vacation. Everybody to love more money and just more staff. But a lot of it boiled down to, can I have a little autonomy? Can I have a little mentoring and guidance? And so a lot of it does come down to what you're talking about, just asking the right questions and being human with people.
I keep coming back to this, but that's the theme of this episode, I think, is slow down. When I was a young journalist coming up in these newsrooms, there wasn't time for these things, and a lot of the times it was editors just saying, here, plug this in, do this. We need to get this out of the door, XYZ. I'm going to redo your story. We're not going to revisit it. You're just going to have to figure it out. And, me being who I was trying to study, okay, what are they changing? Why are they changing these things? But yeah, that sort of leadership development is, I think, lacking in a lot of journalism spaces, and that has to do with all the pressures, and people being promoted quickly. I know I was a managing editor at 23 and could have really used a lot of this stuff back then. But yeah, like, what are we doing, especially going back to this thread of conversation about bringing younger people into the industry? What are we doing to really shape and help people learn, correct their problem, or, problem solve, rather than trying to patch up the boat and ship it out as quickly as possible.
And that's even more crucial as we've downsized and have fewer editors and also gone to remote work. So we have to be really intentional about that. Do you have a favorite time-saving hack?
Limiting when I check email. I am an admitted email addict. The millennial in me is coming through right now. Yeah, just really trying to concentrate all tasks within time, honestly. But that's one thing I try to do daily is just kind of say, this is this time when I'm going to check email the morning, and in the afternoon, newsroom we would have been like, you're insane. So I realized that might be some of the responses I'm getting as I say that now. But really, when we think about all the research around how multitasking is a myth, how, you think that you're getting things done when you're answering emails, but you're not actually. That's made sense for me. And then the other thing that I did at the beginning of this year at the advice of an executive coach was to keep a time journal for a few days, and really just see how you're spending time and have that data. So if there are any data journalists or any data people out there, that was really helpful for me to just see how I'm actually spending time and use that as a foundation for is this matching how I want to spend that time, or is there something that I need to change and adjust? So yeah, those are, I don't know if they're hacks, but practices that can help.
5 years out, 3 to 5 years out, if things go wildly successfully, what do things look like at Lede New Orleans?
Been thinking a lot about physical space and having physical space where we can really bring a civic media hub to life in New Orleans. That looks like having a place where not only our offices are, but, we're able to make and produce media and bring people into that process in physicality. So much of what we do is looking around the community, look for space to hold things. So that's just very front of mind right now. But I think that really I want us to have an editorial process, a content stronghold, really, and to have really leaned into that role as filling in a piece of our ecosystem and our information ecosystem here in New Orleans. Do I know exactly what that content will look like, or will it be a platform, or what will it emerge as? No, not right now, but I want folks to be considering us as a piece of that pie, as I was discussing earlier, and looking to us for content that they're not quite getting elsewhere, something that's, hope driven, solutions driven, and presents voices that they're just not seeing elsewhere. That's my hope.
All right. And now for the recommendations section. New Orleans is one of the great American cities and one of the great cities in the world, really. If people are visiting New Orleans either for the first time or maybe they've been there and they want something new, what are 3 to 5 places or activities that you would recommend?
Oh, that's tough in a place like New Orleans. I have a whole map, a Google map that I send people. So if you want that, let me know. No,
Yeah, I can put that in the show notes.
right. There you go. There you go. So, of course, first and foremost, most people know when you come to New Orleans, go to Cafe Du Monde, get a beignet. Yes, Cafe Du Monde is the premier beignet. Don't go anywhere else. You'll maybe be disappointed. Maybe you don't know the difference. But from someone who's local, go to Cafe Du Monde. A little tip, though, there is a Cafe Du Monde in City Park. So that is my second recommendation. You can get 2 for 1, is to go to City Park. Actually, our community reporting fellows just did a whole reporting series on parks and public spaces, and City Park features prominently on that. But it's one of the largest city parks, municipal parks in the country. But it often gets overlooked, but you can take the streetcar all the way out there. So take a streetcar ride, go visit City Park, get some outdoor time, see the centuries-old oaks that are there, and hit up Cafe Du Monde in City Park. And then the last thing I would recommend is also a natural space. So everybody tends to be in the French Quarter when you visit New Orleans. But if you have the time, I'd really recommend going out to the lakefront. So this is Lake Pontchartrain is on the kind of top of New Orleans, and then the Mississippi River is on the bottom. If you're in the quarter, you're likely to see the Mississippi River and kind of take in that. But I think really kind of the essence of what it is to ecologically be New Orleans really hits home when you go to the lakefront. You basically are confronted with this massive ocean-looking body of water, and you realize you get to see the levees that protect the community that's right next to it, and you just kind of realize how watery New Orleans is, and a bit of an island, but it is a beautiful place, especially at sunset. So those are my recommendations: Cafe Du Monde, City Park, and check out the lakefront.
And I'm gonna quiz you for 2 more. One, is there a hole in the wall restaurant that is not world renowned that you would recommend?
Oh, Tim, now you're asking me to blow up spots. I don't know if I call it hole in the wall, but I think a very small restaurant that I love is called Thousand Figs. It's a Mediterranean restaurant with delicious food, but it is right off of Esplanade Avenue, one of our main thoroughfares that leads right to City Park. They have great affordable food and a very nice, cozy little spot that just makes you feel like, yeah, you're in the neighborhood. So I'm going to shout out Thousand Figs.
Okay. And then the last one in the place recommendations, New Orleans is, internationally known for its music. Is there a small club or venue that you would recommend people check out, or it could be just a historic club or venue?
This is always dependent on your vibe. Um, of course, Preservation Hall is where, if you haven't checked it out and you've been to New Orleans, you should make time to go there. It is history. You kind of walk in and you can feel it there. But I think if you're looking for something that is a little off the beaten trail or outside the quarter, obviously Tipitina's is a great place to catch a show. There's always something going down over there. So yeah, if you can take the streetcar out that way, that's the slower, older, historic St. Charles Avenue streetcar line. So it might take a little bit longer. Or catch an Uber. That is always a fun time.
And then the final question, media recommendations. This can be any form of media, and it can be entertainment or nonfiction.
If you're in New Orleans and visiting, I want to shout out Verite. I love the work that they're doing over there. It's a great, in addition to Lede New Orleans, a great way to kind of see different voices that are happening in the city. So if you are local or in the region, definitely check them out. In terms of other recommendations, I've been really interested in Translash, and they have a newsletter. So this is a trans media organization. Just in the wake of the election, if you are following trans rights at all, I think that this is a really great, authentic voice and a very interesting perspective. They have a newsletter that lands in my inbox, so I'd like to see that. I'm also going to shout out my friends at Canopy Atlanta in Atlanta. I love the work that they're doing. They're very similar vein of community reporting. They do very neighborhood issues reporting, where they focus on a specific neighborhood. And I love getting their newsletter as well, even though I don't live in Atlanta. It's just, well, one, seeing how they do things, but also just kind of seeing the different voices that are out there in a very complex city that I think is kind of the future of our country and resembles it in a lot of ways. So those are my recommendations that are immediately coming to mind. There's a billion others, of course, because the world we live in. But yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This has been great.
Thank you, Tim. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Local News Matters podcast. Never miss an episode by subscribing in your favorite podcast player and sign up for our newsletter at lnmpod.com. And thanks to our production partners at Pirate Audio. Pirate Audio believes every community deserves great things to listen to, and they're on a mission to help local newsrooms reach their communities via audio. If you're interested in starting a podcast or need production support for an existing one, let me know and I'll be happy to connect you. If you have guest recommendations, others doing interesting and innovative work in local news, let me know through the contact form at the website lnmpod.com.